Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into a word you probably hear on the news pretty much constantly: asylum. It's usually surrounded by intense debate, heavy politics, and a lot of complex legal jargon. But what actually is asylum in simple terms? And maybe more importantly, how does this really straightforward concept of just seeking safety translate into a high-stakes, real-world obstacle course? I am so excited to guide you through this, because by the end of our time together, you're going to see exactly how shifting rules, strict deadlines, and new fees impact the literal day-to-day lives of people navigating the system.
To make sense of it all, we're going to break this journey down into four major hurdles: the starting line, the definitional hurdle, the ticking clock, and finally, the logistical toll. Let's jump right in.
All right, hurdle number one, the starting line, where we cover the absolute basics.
So what exactly is asylum in simple terms? If you strip away all the confusing statutes and legal speak, asylum is essentially an international and domestic legal protection. It's granted to a person who has left their home country and simply cannot return because it's unsafe. Inherent in this whole concept is the principle that an individual needs protection because their own country's government either can't or won't protect them from severe harm. It's really that fundamental.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. You don't automatically get asylum just because your home country is dangerous or impoverished. To actually legally qualify, an applicant has to prove they are fleeing persecution based on one of 5 specific protected statutory grounds. Those are race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and membership in something called a particular social group, or PSG. Now, the first 4 are usually fairly straightforward to define, but that 5th one, oh boy, that's where things get incredibly complicated.
Which brings us to Section 2, the definitional hurdle, or the messy reality of proving the claim.
To use that particular social group category, you have to pass a notoriously difficult 3-part test that's been built up over years of immigration court precedent. First, the group has to share a common, immutable trait. This means something members literally cannot change, or morally shouldn't be required to change, like their gender or sexual orientation. Second is particularity, meaning the group must have clear, definable boundaries. And third, social distinction. The surrounding society must actually recognize this group as a distinct unit. Proving all 3 of these is a massive, massive hurdle. It's especially tough for individuals fleeing non-governmental harm, like victims of severe gang violence or domestic abuse.
To give you an idea of how wild this gets, let's look at domestic violence survivors who have faced absolute legal whiplash over the last decade. Because U.S. law allows the Attorney General to overrule the Board of Immigration Appeals, the definition of a particular social group literally flips back and forth depending on who is in the White House. Look at this timeline. In 2014, a ruling allowed domestic violence survivors to qualify. Then, in 2018, Attorney General Sessions blocked those claims, basically saying private violence doesn't count. Fast forward to 2021, and Attorney General Garland vacates that restriction. And then, just recently in 2025, Attorney General Bondi reinstates the 2018 restrictions again. Just imagine trying to prepare a life-or-death legal case when the very definition of who even qualifies totally reverses every few years. It's like legal ping pong.
All right, moving to Section 3, the ticking clock. Because yes, there are strict deadlines.
Let's say you do somehow manage to successfully define your claim. Well, the crucial number you need to remember now is 1. Federal law demands that you file your asylum application within exactly 1 year of arriving in the United States. If you file on day 366, that's it. You are permanently barred from receiving asylum.
So what happens if you do miss that 1-year mark? Well, your only hope of keeping your asylum dream alive is proving one of these very narrow statutory exceptions. You'd have to prove changed circumstances, something like a sudden political coup in your home country, or maybe a major shift in your personal life, like converting to a targeted religion or publicly coming out as LGBTQIA+ while here in the U.S. You might also qualify if there's a sudden shift in legal precedent or if you lost a lawful status, like, say, a student visa expiring. But as you can probably guess, proving any of these exceptions requires a mountain of extensive evidence.
Now, if you miss the deadline and you don't qualify for one of those rare exceptions, you're forced to apply for an alternative protection called withholding of removal. And the differences are huge. To win asylum, courts require you to prove a well-founded fear, which legally translates to about a 10% chance of harm. Asylum gives you a path to a green card and lets you bring your family to the U.S. But withholding of removal, that requires a clear probability. You literally have to prove there is a greater than 50% chance you will be harmed. It's this incredibly precarious legal limbo. It offers no green card, and heartbreakingly, it legally prevents you from bringing your stranded spouse or minor children to the United States. You're protected from deportation, sure, but your family remains permanently separated.
Which brings us to our fourth and final hurdle, Section 4, the logistical toll, covering fees and daily realities.
For decades, applying for asylum was totally free. The system recognized that people fleeing persecution often show up with absolutely nothing. But as of a new rule implemented for 2026, for the first time in U.S. history, asylum applicants actually have to pay fees. It costs $100 to file the initial application. On top of that, there is now an ongoing $100 annual fee for every single year the case remains pending in the highly backlogged system. The Department of Homeland Security says this is necessary to fund the system and deter fraudulent applications, while advocacy groups argue it severely penalizes legitimate refugees who just don't have the resources.
Take a look at the actual digital portal applicants have to use to pay this new fee. If you get a notice to pay, immigration judges can set incredibly tight deadlines. We're talking sometimes requiring payment in just a few days. If you don't have internet access, or you get confused by this portal, or you miss the deadline by a single day, your entire asylum case can just be completely dismissed.
So you might be wondering, how do applicants afford these fees and, feed themselves while they wait? Well, they have to get a work permit. But doing that means navigating what the government calls the asylum clock. You can't just arrive and start working. You have to wait 150 days after filing your complete asylum application before you can even apply for a permit, and 180 days before you can actually receive it. And here is the major catch. This clock can stop. If you request to reschedule a hearing to find a lawyer, or if a judge pauses your proceedings, the clock freezes. You could end up waiting years unable to legally earn a single dollar to pay those new annual fees.
And while that clock ticks on their paperwork, there's also physical tracking to consider. The government manages the massive influx of applicants, increasingly through programs called alternatives to detention, rather than holding everyone in really expensive detention centers. And the most notable of these alternatives? GPS ankle monitors.
It's a huge trade-off. From the government's perspective, ankle monitors are a massive win. They cost only about $4.50 a day, compared to over $200 a day for physical detention. Plus, they have an over 90% success rate in getting applicants to actually show up to court. But for the person wearing it, the cons are severe. The devices only hold a charge for about 6 hours, which means wearers have to physically tether themselves to a wall outlet for hours, twice a day. They cause physical inflammation and cramping, and honestly, perhaps most devastatingly, they carry a really deep social stigma. It looks just like a criminal shackle, which makes it almost impossible for these applicants to get hired by employers, even once their work permit clock finally reaches that 180-day mark.
So, we've covered a lot today. We've seen how the very basic, simple concept of seeking safety from persecution has evolved into an incredibly complex, high-stakes gauntlet. From the constantly shifting definitions of who qualifies, to the unforgiving one-year deadline, the new recurring fees, the strict work permit clock, and the physical toll of electronic monitoring. As you walk away from this explainer today, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Is a system defined by constant legal hurdles, administration shifting rules, and literal ticking clocks ultimately a sanctuary? Or is it simply a different kind of survival test? Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the systems around us.